The icy wind howled across the deserted highway as 12-year-old Maya clutched her small bag tightly, her red coat barely enough to shield her from the freezing cold. Snowflakes stung her face as she stood there, watching the yellow taxi's taillights vanish into the distance. It had all happened so quickly. What started as a routine cab ride to visit her grandmother ended with her being forced out of the car, miles from any shelter, on one of the coldest nights of the year. The cab driver, annoyed by what seemed like a trivial misunderstanding, decided she wasn't worth the trouble and drove off without a second thought. Maya was no stranger to adversity, but this was unlike anything she had faced before. The temperature was dropping rapidly, the highway was eerily quiet, and there wasn't a single car in sight. She tried to stay calm, but her fingers were already numb, and her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. The situation felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. Why would someone abandon a child in such dangerous conditions? What Maya didn't know was that her resolve and quick thinking would soon be tested in unimaginable ways. As the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, her survival instincts kicked in, and she began walking, hoping to find help or at least a sign of life. Little did she realize, the events that were about to unfold would not only change her life, but would also spark a wave of outrage and inspire countless others. With danger lurking and no clear path ahead, the question remained: how would Maya find her way out of this freezing, desolate highway, and who would come to her rescue when she needed it most? Maya's mind raced as she trudged forward, her boots crunching through the thick snow. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, the barren landscape offering no clues of where to go or how far she was from safety. She replayed the moments before the driver kicked her out of the cab. The argument had started over a payment issue. Her mother had arranged the ride and planned to pay upon arrival. But the driver grew impatient, raising his voice and accusing Maya of wasting his time. Despite her pleas and attempts to explain, he had pulled over, opened the door, and left her in the cold without a second glance. The more she thought about it, the angrier and more scared she became. It wasn't just the bitter cold biting at her skin, it was the realization of how little he cared about what might happen to her. Maya wiped away the tears forming in her eyes, knowing they would freeze in the biting wind. She couldn't let her fear paralyze her. If she stopped walking now, the cold would win. In the distance, faint headlights appeared, a speck of light against the darkness. Her heart leaped with hope, but she hesitated. What if it wasn't safe? What if she flagged down someone as unkind as the cab driver? Her instincts told her to be cautious, yet she couldn't afford to let this chance pass her by. She stepped closer to the edge of the road, her arm tentatively raised to signal the oncoming vehicle. As the car slowed, Maya's pulse quickened. She couldn't make out who was inside, but her gut told her this moment would change everything. Whether for better or worse, she was about to find out. The car came to a slow stop, its tires crunching against the icy road. Maya hesitated, her heart pounding as the driver's side window rolled down. A middle-aged woman with kind but cautious eyes leaned out. "Are you okay? What are you doing out here alone in this weather?" the woman asked, her voice laced with concern. Maya wanted to feel relief, but the day's events had left her too shaken to trust easily. Still, she couldn't ignore the freezing cold pressing in on her. She nodded, her voice barely audible as she said, I need help." The woman stepped out of the car, her breath visible in the frigid air, and handed Maya a blanket from the back seat. "Come on, get in. You'll freeze out here." Maya hesitated for a moment longer before climbing into the warm car. As the heat wrapped around her frozen limbs, she tried to explain what had happened. She told the woman about the cab driver, the argument, and how he had abandoned her on the highway. The woman listened intently, her expression shifting between anger and disbelief. As they drove, the woman introduced herself as Carla, a nurse who was on her way home from a late shift. She offered to take Maya to the nearest police station to report what had happened. Maya agreed, but deep down, she wasn't sure if it would make a difference. Would anyone care? Would anyone hold the driver accountable for what he'd done? Meanwhile, back at home, Maya's mother, Olivia, was growing frantic. She had tried calling Maya several times, but her phone had died. Olivia's worry soon turned to action. She contacted the cab company, demanding answers, but was met with indifference. As she pressed for information, she began to uncover unsettling details about the driver's past behavior, complaints that had been ignored, incidents swept under the rug. Olivia knew she couldn't sit back and wait. Something had to be done, and she was determined to find her daughter before it was too late. As Carla's car approached the town limits, Maya noticed another vehicle trailing them. It had been behind them for several miles now, and something about its persistence didn't feel right. Maya's stomach tightened as she glanced back again, wondering if this was the start of yet another problem she wasn't prepared to face. Maya's unease grew with every passing minute as the car behind them stayed firmly on their trail. Carla noticed it too, glancing at her rearview mirror with a frown. "I don't like this," she muttered under her breath, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. Maya tried to stay calm, but the pit in her stomach was growing. Was it the cab driver? Someone else? The possibilities made her shiver, and it wasn't just from the cold anymore. Carla decided to take a detour, turning down a smaller road that led toward a more populated area. The car behind them hesitated at the intersection, then followed, keeping its distance but never losing sight of them. "Okay, this isn't normal," Carla said, her voice firm but nervous. Maya's pulse quickened. She gripped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to figure out what they could do next. "Maybe we should call the police now," she suggested quietly. Carla nodded and handed Maya her phone while keeping her eyes on the road. As Maya dialed, the car suddenly sped up, closing the distance between them. Carla's calm demeanor shifted into full alertness. "Hold on," she said sharply, pressing down on the accelerator. The car rolled forward, and Maya held her breath as they weaved through the snowy road. The phone call connected, but Maya could barely explain the situation to the operator over the sound of her racing heart. The dispatcher assured her help was on the way, but would it get there in time? The pursuit felt endless. The car behind them flashed its high beams, momentarily blinding Carla. She swerved slightly but kept control, refusing to let fear take over. Maya's thoughts spiraled. Who was in that car, and why were they so intent on following them? The tension between her and Carla was palpable as they drove toward the lights of a nearby gas station, hoping it would provide safety, or at least witnesses. But just as they neared it, the car behind them sped up again, dangerously close, its engine roaring like a threat. As the car behind them closed in, Carla made a split-second decision and veered into the gas station's parking lot, pulling up sharply near the entrance. The bright lights of the station offered a sliver of comfort, but the tension didn't ease. Maya clutched the phone tightly, still connected to the dispatcher, as she watched the pursuing car slow down and park a short distance away. Its headlights were blinding, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to stretch toward them. Carla leaned toward Maya. "Stay in the car. If anything happens, lock the doors and don't move," she instructed, her voice low and steady but filled with urgency. Maya nodded, her breath hitching as Carla stepped out, trying to look unbothered while heading toward the station's entrance. Maya's eyes darted back to the car. The driver's door opened and a figure emerged. A tall man in a heavy coat, his face partially obscured by the hood. Instead of walking toward Carla, the man turned his attention to Maya, his movements slow but deliberate. Maya's heart pounded as she tried to decipher his intentions. Was he the cab driver? Or someone entirely different? Her fingers hovered over the door lock, and she considered whether to run or stay put as Carla had told her. She could hear Carla inside, talking urgently to the cashier, likely asking for help. But out here, she was alone. Then, out of nowhere, a second car pulled up, this one unmarked, but with red and blue lights flashing from the dashboard. The police had arrived. Relief flooded Maya for a brief moment, but it quickly dissipated when the officer who stepped out started walking toward the man instead of addressing Carla or Maya. The officer greeted him like they knew each other. Maya's unease deepened. Was this man connected to the authorities? And if so, why was he following them? Maya watched, frozen, as the officer exchanged a brief but knowing glance with the man who had been following them. It was clear they were connected, and any hope she had for immediate safety began to crumble. Carla emerged from the gas station, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking frantically. She saw the interaction between the officer and the man, her face darkening with worry as she hurried back toward the car. Before Carla could reach the door, the man stepped forward, blocking her path. "You've been causing quite the stir tonight," he said, his tone cold and calculated. Carla, refusing to back down, squared her shoulders. "If you think you can intimidate me, you're mistaken. I've already called for backup." She turned her eyes to the officer. "And if you're involved in this, it won't end well for either of you." The officer hesitated, but the man smirked, as if he had the upper hand. Just then, another police cruiser pulled into the gas station lot, its lights cutting through the tense scene. Maya recognized the officer stepping out. It was the one from earlier, the kind voice who had spoken to her over the phone. He approached with purpose, his eyes immediately narrowing on the man. "Kevin, you're way out of line," he said firmly. "Step away now." The man's confidence faltered. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, but the newly arrived officer didn't give him a chance to explain. "Save it. I know exactly what's going on here. We've been tracking you for months." With a swift motion, the officer signaled for backup to detain both the man and the compromised officer. As the scene unfolded, Carla and Maya exchanged a look of relief, but just as they thought it was over, the officer approached their car and spoke softly. "This wasn't random," he said. "Maya, there's more you need to know about why this happened." The words sent a chill down her spine, leaving her wondering what secrets were still buried in the night. As the chaos settled, the officer who had come to their rescue knelt to Maya's level, his expression softening. "You've been so brave tonight," he said. "I know this has been terrifying, but it's over now. You're safe." Maya nodded, clutching her mother's hand tightly. Carla, though visibly shaken, turned to him with determination. "What did you mean when you said this wasn't random? What's really going on?" The officer took a deep breath. "The man we just arrested has been part of a trafficking ring we've been investigating for a long time. He likely targeted you because he thought you were vulnerable traveling with a child, and the officer who was helping him. We had suspicions about him for a while, but tonight gave us the evidence we needed to take action." Carla's heart sank as she realized how close they had come to danger, but there was a sense of gratitude too. Gratitude for the officer who had listened to her, for her own instincts, and for Maya's resilience in the face of fear. As more officers arrived and the suspects were taken into custody, the officer assured them that they would have full protection and support moving forward. Later that night, back at a safe place, Carla wrapped Maya in a warm blanket, holding her close. "We've been through so much, but we're stronger for it," she whispered. Maya looked up at her with a small smile, her voice steady despite the night's events. "You always keep me safe, Mama." The ordeal had been harrowing, but it also revealed the strength of their bond and the power of speaking up, even when it felt impossible. In the end, the courage of one mother and her daughter had not only saved them, but helped bring justice to a wider world of wrongs.